my head in the stars.
And just I was just getting into that idea of like I said, the chemical receptors, right? The dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin, right? Those things that we are released when we're expressing things, with oxytocin, the physical touch and the connection, serotonin helping other people and creating those connections, right? And the dopamine accomplishing tasks. And it just, we were having a conversation yesterday in Ventura County. That's what's behind me there, Ventura Harbor, actually. But I wasn't on the harbor. I was actually at Ventura Beach yesterday. And because I stayed at a hotel that usually isn't cheap, but for some reason it was really inexpensive. And I know why it's inexpensive right now because they're doing work on it and there was scaffolding all around the building. So my beach view was covered by scaffolding, right? So I can tell they're trying to get people still in there, which is cool. I mean, it was a good experience and it was fun.
Right.
And
Where
it was
was
a
that
cheap
again?
the in Ventura at the Crown Plaza on Ventura
Oh, I
Beach.
love the Crown Plaza. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I know the Crown
yeah.
Plaza. Yeah.
It's a great place. I usually stay at the harbor because it's cheaper, right? And they're both IHG Holiday Inn. So, but yeah, this time they're doing work on it. So they have scaffolding all around, and so you
Yeah.
know, it's probably cheaper because of that. But it was a great time. It was awesome. But we were talking in Ventura County, and it was with a bunch of case managers, right? So for CalWorks, Welfare to Work, right, aging an adult, and people who work with the unhoused, right? And so they were just having that conversation about doing things, right? And the class was about encouraging engagement, right? And part of the conversation was how do you engage folks? How do you motivate folks? How do you get them to be able to want to come back and be interested in coming back? And people just throwing around ideas of solving problems, and that's great, to solve people's problems. But, you know, if you're solving problems for everybody, right, it makes you feel great. But how often is it really not helping somebody else grow? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so that turned into a lot into the second half of the class is more about strength-based counseling, strength-based coaching. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about that. But at the beginning, I mean, it was something, something I ask a lot in classes. I say, how many people are the go-to person for your family or your friend group, where they come to you with all your problems and all their problems and you give them answers, right? And they're like, how does it feel? And some people are like, well, it's good to know, then I can be there for some people. And then one lady, she said, yeah, I'd like to be counted on, but it's exhausting. Right. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
why is it exhausting? Well, it's because, if I'm constantly putting out other people's fires, I have my own fires and I don't have that person that I can come to and talk to. Right. And a lot of folks who are those problem solvers, share that same issue where you have everyone come to you. Who do you have to go to? Right. That's why therapists need therapists, coaches need coaches, right? So,
Right.
you know, it was a good conversation on that. And we talked about dopamine and how it feels good to solve people's problems so much that we can train people how to interact with us, whether it's somebody in your case files, if it's a manager with your staff members, right? If it's a coach with your coachee, right? And I explained to them the difference between mentorship and coaching, right? Mentorship, you give those
Mm-hmm.
tips and advice, right? Coaching, that's the last thing you do, right? You want them to come up with those ideas. And so
Yep.
um, it was really, and not just even professionally, but personally, right? So if you are solving your kids' problems, your spouse's problems, your bestie's problems, right? All the time, you know, how are you setting them up to be able to accomplish these things without you, right?
Yeah.
Or without the level of support that you feel like you have to give to people, you
Right.
know.
Well, for the record, my bestie's problems are always going to be my problems. If she has a problem, we have a problem. Just clearing that up real quick. Everybody else, I hold you capable, but we ride at dawn for the bestie.
But
Just
I
saying.
also know your bestie, and I know your bestie has already solved the problem before she calls you and says, "Oh my
Right.
God, let me tell you about this. This is what I did," right? And so you guys can talk about the problem. I
And
know
how
dope
she's solving
completely.
it.
Yes, right? And
But that doesn't mean it's not my problem now, too, though.
well, absolutely,
Like they
we
said, what?
yeah,
They said, what?
exactly.
We hate
Yeah.
them. We
Yeah.
hate them. I don't even need their side of the story. You're already trustable. So,
Right.
uh,
If
that's
that's,
me.
but then you don't have to go, well, here's what you need to do. You need to go, no, she's already got
No,
that.
never.
So let me tell you what I did,
Yeah,
right? That's healthy,
right.
right? Because she can
Yeah,
solve her own problems. She can figure those things out. It's when we have, people, that are in our
I know
lives,
what
they're
you're
like,
saying.
what
Yeah,
do I do? How do I do it? Right. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one for folks who have never even really thought about, I'm helping people, but, you
yeah,
know, am I doing harm? Right.
right.
So,
Yeah, there's definitely a fine line between helping and hurting. And even with coaching, and it's like there's this parallel, right? Coaching, parenting, leadership, right? And I don't think you have to have children to like understand this analogy because we've all had parents or caregivers in our lives. If I'm parenting and I do everything for my child, where do they learn to do for themselves, right? And I mean, there's certain like times where they're going to be more dependent because that's part of the development, right? So I'm not going to ask my 2-year-old to do laundry. But maybe a 9-year-old, if they can work an iPad, they can work a washing machine. You know what I mean? So um, there's this having to let go and to empower and encourage children to develop and grow and have appropriate independence. And I think there's the same thing with like coaching and leadership. There's going to be some times where people are more dependent. Why? Because they're new to the organization, they're new to the field, they're new to your team, and you're going to have to do a little bit of hand holding to help them learn the ropes. And then there's a letting go where, again, we're letting people have appropriate levels of independence and trust. And it can be scary, but it's necessary. And I sometimes hesitate to make this comparison because our employees and the people we coach are not children. They're adults. They're adults with their own experiences, their own lives, their own beliefs and values. And so I don't want to be like, oh, we're parenting people because we're absolutely not. Leadership is not parenting. But there again are some parallels that I think are worth noting because as much as leaders think, oh, I empower people, I give people a lot of space to grow and develop. When it comes to now having feedback conversations or coaching conversations, instead of it being a coaching conversation or an opportunity to grow and develop and let people be accountable, it almost always becomes punitive and shame and blame. And how dare you? You made this mistake. You know, that's against our policy. There's going to be some real consequences for you, mister, if you keep this up. Wait till I tell your dad. That becomes, and I know those are not the exact words because that becomes the feeling. So, if we treat people like children, they're going to act like children. And so if we can treat people like capable adults, we can hold people capable, it's one of my favorite phrases, then they will be more capable because we're giving them the space to figure that out. And I just feel like a lot of times, whether we're in case management, we're in leadership, we're even coaches, we have this preconceived idea of what people should do. And so we're guiding them to what they should do, but it's not always what's the right thing for them. And so letting go of that control and worry. And another thing I love is worry about yourself. Because let's
yeah.
just be honest, a lot of the advice that people will give from the outside, you should do this or you could do that, or here's what you should do, here's the best option. That person would probably not do that same thing in the same situation. They think they'll do it. They think that's what they might do. But but then the rubber hits the road. Oh, that's too hard. That's too much. What if they this and what if they? So it's like take your own advice and let other people figure themselves out. If you want to really give somebody advice, worry about yourself.
Yeah.
Worry about
Well,
yourself.
and even to that point, people may give advice that they wouldn't do, but then even if you're giving advice that you would do, who's to say that the person you're coaching is going to do that as well? Right.
Exactly.
So if you're your bestie who is doesn't mind confrontation and will walk up and be assertive to somebody and point things out in a way that's compelling, right? That's cool, but that doesn't work for everybody else who maybe isn't as assertive, right? And so thinking about what I would do is the natural thing. That's where our brain wants to go. Our brain wants, we take everything personal, as we've said many, many times, right? So we take in
Hmm.
that information. How would I apply it? How would I do it? How am I feeling about it? All of those things are happening in our minds. And if we just allow ourselves to react on those, we're going to tell people to do what we want, what we think they should do, and how they should do it. And if you don't do it, it's wrong. So we sit in judgment of people. We don't hold them capable. We hold them incapable of being able to solve their own problems. If you am to really be an effective problem solver, you want to be able to hold people capable to the idea that they can solve their own problem, which is what's at the core of coaching, right? People have the answers they have the solutions to their own problems. It's very often they don't
Hmm.
have the time, space, or person to be able to share that with, that who is non-judgmental and provides empathetic support. Right. So we live in such a judgmental society. You have to look like this. You have to look like this. These are the trends you need to follow. This is, the work hours you need to do. And just all these things that have been passed down through generations about how we're supposed to move in our society. And we will absorb those and we will incorporate those into our ideas of right or wrong, right? Or just even our
Yeah.
family members, our culture. Even if we come from another culture, another country, right? We have those in our head about how people should be doing things. And it's all those shoulds, right?
Yeah.
And call it being shit on, right? How many times have you been shit on, right? You should be
Sure.
doing this. You should be dressing this way. You should be, going to church. You should be talking to people like this. And you talked about treating people like children. That's what we tell our kids. You should go to bed. You should clean your room, right? And that has a response as an adult who is hopefully an independent, full-fledged person with full, critical thinking capacities to say, I feel like you're belittling me, like you're making me feel less. And you see it in how many managers, Tiff, have you talked to who talk about babysitting their staff, right? And I have to hold people's hands, right? And just think about, if you're saying that to people, if you say it in front of you, well, if I have to babysit you, then I will. I don't want to be babysat. I want a manager who's going to say, I want to teach you how to do this, or hear what you have to say, how you would accomplish it, and then we can work in how that works within our framework, and then let you blossom, right?
Right.
You talked about not, feedback and telling people stuff. Most people don't ask for feedback. Most leaders, and just in my experience and all the 360s I've done with leaders in leadership academies, consistently one of the lowest, if not the lowest, score on all of the questions that are asked in the 360 is asks for feedback, right? And
Right.
so a lot of people say, well, I don't understand. I have an open door policy, right? But open door policy is, hey, if you need anything, you can come talk to me. Well, how many people, what has society taught us about people who need something, right? That they're
Yeah.
weak, that they can't handle things. And if somebody does come and knock on your door and ask you, oh, well, you didn't get that in the training last week? We were all together in the training, which is a judgment, right? Even if you think it's, why do you have to ask that? Obviously they didn't, right? Which is opposed to, okay, so we had that training last week. What is something that you wanted to look at more closely
Mhm.
from that training? Because like you said, we can be in a training, we can be in a conversation. Most of us aren't auditory learners. And how many trainings have you been in where it's just a straight lecture, where it's just auditory learning? Or, oh, here's the pamphlets connected to what I'm telling you about, right? And so, if it's not experiential, if it's not written, if it doesn't create a transfer of learning, follow-up conversation with folks, you really are cutting out about 75% of us who are in those rooms trying to learn, right? And that's a challenge. That's a challenge that I found, shoot, I'm still battling it every day. How much content
Hmm.
do I have? And if I feel like I need to race through my content, what opportunities am I giving people to actually absorb that content? Right. And I see
Right.
it in trainings all the time. Right. I have friends that are professors that say, yeah, I know I pack too much stuff into my slide deck and I never get to the end, but I feel like I need to. And it's like, if you're doing that, you feel like you have to talk, right? Then where is that experiential learning? Where is the role plays? Where's the scenarios? Where is that actually absorption of the material into practical application? And it's just
Right.
it's just really a challenge, and a lot of us think we're doing the right thing because we've been taught that that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Elementary school, junior high, high school, what do they do? It's mostly lecture, right? And hopefully you have some labs, where you're actually learning. But you know, if you've ever done a lesson plan for high school or junior high, a lot of times it's how do we get through these things? But what it needs to be mixed in is how is this applying to you? How is
Right.
this affecting you? What will you want to do with this? Because that's such an important time. You want the critical thinking to be developed before critical thinking stops being developed. Right?
Right. And I think that's like the value of coaching because when I think about that shift between like knowledge and skill, right? I can know a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean I can do any of it, right? As an example of this, I can probably tell you the process of how to change the oil on a car. Like I know the mechanics of it. I know that there's a little screw you have to take out. I know you got to put the pan under it. I know there's a filter with the tool that you got to take the oil filter off. I know you got to choose the right oil for the car. I know you have to have the right filter for like I know all of those things. Ask me if I could ever change oil on a vehicle. Probably not. I have the knowledge, I don't have the skill. And I think what happens a lot of times with um, development and people trying to develop others is that they just rely so heavily on knowledge. Like, let me just pump you full of information. But then there's no opportunity to take that information and put it into like a skill, like practice. How do you actually practice that? I personally, I try to be very intentional when I create courses to have enough information to practice the skill. Like my thought process when I start to develop something is like, what do I want people to know or be able to do as a result of their time here? Is this something that they'll be able to take out and practice after this course? Can they commit to actually practicing the skill versus just like, oh, I learned some cool stuff about how my brain works? No, can you leave here and practice these skills because now you know how your brain works and you know how you can do activities that will make your brain perform better? Do you have something tangible in your hand that will lead you to action? That's what I'm thinking about. So, the data dump is not, I'm not a huge fan of it. And I know that I've been in some courses where it's so much information, I'm saturated, right? There's no, at what point do we do stuff? Like great info. Like I'll give you a perfect example of this. I went to a training several years ago on motivational interviewing, and it was great for understanding what motivational interviewing is. And my on the eval, I put really understand motivational interviewing and what it is and why it is. I have no idea how to do it. We never at one point learned how to do motivational interviewing. We at no point learned how to practice motivational interviewing. So this was great to acquire knowledge, but I have no idea how to apply it to the job. And that was a true story. I mean, it was cool to learn about. I was interested, I was engaged, but I kept thinking to myself, how do I do this? Like, how do I? Because, and by the way, the instructor, we were a group of employment service counselors. So we were focused on employment services, and this person was a drug counselor. And so all of the explanation about how to do motivational interviewing had everything to do with sobriety, had nothing to do with helping with employment. So I'm like, and I'm not a stupid person, by the way. I'm not a dumb person. I can connect the dots. I can usually take it from here to there. But in that instance, I'm like, this doesn't apply in any way, shape, or form to like what our role is. And I'm having a really hard time connecting the dots. I wish we would have had more time for that. And so I
Yeah,
try not to waste people's time. And it wasn't, this was not a terrible instructor. This is no knock to the instructor. I think it was uh the challenge was there wasn't enough communication about what the training needed to include.
yeah,
And so they went and did their thing. It was the right training for the wrong audience. How about that? It was a great training for the wrong people. And that's also something to consider when you're even as a coach, as a leader, like who's your audience? What do they need from you? Right.
yeah,
So with
yeah.
with like someone I'm coaching, they need me to be present. They need me to ask questions. They need me to like explore. With my best friend, I may not need to do that. What I need to do is listen, give her some validation that she's has correct opinions on everything because she does. And to again just validate that experience. I don't have to do any necessarily open-ended questions or thoughts because she's going to tell me everything that she wants me to know. So it's like know your audience. How do you have to show up? As a leader, it's the same thing. Not every employee that you have is going to want or need the same thing. Are you flexible enough to be able to meet them where they're at
Yeah.
and be flexible?
That flexibility is so important. Just even, just in different levels of leadership, right? I mean, I remember, um, gosh, a bunch of years ago, I went through a change management class that I developed a large part of it, but then another large part of it was a simulation that we had a vendor come in and create, that the groups of people were going to come in and they were going to accomplish this and then have a score and see who won, right? And so we did it with senior leadership. They bought into it. For them, it was challenging, but it was good. It was something that really applied to what it is that they do and who they lead. And then they branched it out to other leaders and they took it to the branches, right? And the feedback we got from, oh, that was too tough. And I heard people walking out, why do I have to that's something that I'm not interested in doing. That's for the EMG and that's for all the senior leaders up there that are thinking about strategy. I'm really just trying to drive profits and keep my staff together and create
Mhm.
this feeling of community, right? And so that was a lot of the feedback we got from that, where the executives like, oh, this was great. It was challenging. We need to give this to our other leaders. And those leaders at that point, some of them were cool with it, but a lot of folks were like, this is a little above above my weight class, right? And so,
Right.
so we have to recognize, like you said, that individuality, right? Just taking a look at who are folks that, you know, um, who are we designing the training for? Who are we, what are the objectives? And if it's something that may not be for them, then maybe we can explain to them this is something that other people are looking at. And so what are your objectives that might be different than what the original intent was? But that comes with that design and recognizing who your audience is, like you mentioned yesterday. We did a whole section on change management and helping to engage people who are in the change process, right? And so we came up with a bunch of uh you know um evoking change wording in conversations. And I had people split up into groups of three and just talk about something they want to change, and then somebody was going to listen to them and use open-ended questions, use some of those questions, use the change scale, right, and things like that. And it was, for some people it was easier, for other people it was a little challenging. One of the most challenging things is going from yes or no questions, closed-ended questions, to open-ended questions, and how to practice that. And so I asked one of the guys, I asked everyone, I said, so how'd that feel? What did you yeah, how did you feel you were accomplished? And one of the guys said, yeah, it's because we have all these questions here, that's helpful. Right. And other
Hmm.
people were laughing. And I was like, that's good. That's awesome, right? You have those questions there, and you want to use those questions if you want to commit those to memory or see how those questions apply to the different conversations you're having with people. Absolutely, some of us need those prompts in front of us, some of us just have it in their head, some people just have that natural feel. That's great. And I said, and if that's something that you want to have that in front of you, then keep it in front of you, and just and until you feel comfortable, fake it till you make it, right? And so it was empowering for him. He felt better because, I mean, he knew he was a newer case manager, and it was a conversation. Tiff, he asked, so we want to learn more about our clients, and we want to get more information from them. He says, but we only have so much time that we can work with them. And so, how do we balance that, getting more information from them and working with them? I said, well, I see, if you develop that trust and ask those open-ended questions, you're going to get more information from them very often in one meeting than you would in 2 months. right? And I
Yeah.
asked someone, I said, if you guys, I asked the rest of the group, I said, anybody here who's been in case management, have you ever gotten information from a client you wish you would have got 2 months before? And a bunch of people were nodding their head, so, and that's from many different reasons. I don't trust you. I don't know you. I don't trust the system. My last case manager, did not care, right? Or I'm maybe just not quite ready to be able to have these types of questions and deal with my own self and my own issues. I said, but very often it has nothing to do with you. But we will take
Hmm.
that personal. Why aren't they responding to me? Why aren't they answering my questions? Why aren't they giving me information? What, they don't trust me? It has nothing to do with you as a person, right? If somebody else got their case, that might be a trust issue with them, right?
Right.
And so it's just such a hard thing to build that capacity. We can tell people till the cows come home, but if we don't let them experience it, like you mentioned, you know, how are they going to apply it? Right? It's great information. How am I going to use it? I hate that.
Well, right. And the other thing I think about is experience is such a great teacher. I have only gotten smart in my old age because I've done it wrong millions of times. I
Mhm.
mean, honestly, I could tell you all the stories of where I've gotten it wrong, all of the things I did the opposite way of how they should have been done. And I've also had to suffer the consequences of those choices, which are painful and embarrassing sometimes and shape your worldview. So I only have my life somewhat together now because my life has fallen apart many, many times and I've had to reconstruct. I mean, I'm being very, very genuine here because um, there's certain places I can't even pop my head in just because of, 2008. I'm just saying. So,
Mhm.
with that being said, when I think about my own development and my own growth, when we try to shield people from the consequences of their choices, we're actually keeping them stuck and keeping them in that place where they don't get to develop their own wisdom. And it's difficult because we've learned from our experience and we want to like help prevent people from pain and suffering and embarrassment and humiliation. And that's probably like the biggest fertilizer for growth is that you have to experience the hardship to be able to learn the lesson. I don't necessarily learn my life lessons. I can learn some life lessons from other people, but a lot of times I have to experience it myself in order for it to really have meaning. And so I try to keep that in mind. Like, do what you want. I know you've heard me say that a million times. Do what you want. Do what you want because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I want. And I think that mentality helps me let go of a bit of control because I can say whatever choices you choose to make, they're not going to impact me. They're going to impact you. And therefore, how do I have a voice about what you choose and what's going to happen to you? I mean, even with my own kids, I love my kids, and this is not to say I don't give them information. This is
Mhm.
not to say I don't sometimes have those hard conversations to say like you're going the wrong direction. Like, let's talk about that. I try not to do it with judgment, which again, I'm not always good at either. But I want them to benefit from so I can say, here's my experience. What do you think? Versus saying this is what you need to do or this is what you should do because it's not my choice to make. So I think that's a lot of the difference between when people are receptive to information and when they're not receptive to information. It has a lot to do with how you're delivering the package. So if I'm saying, Carl, you need to do this, you have to do this. This is mandatory. This is required. This is whatever. No, thank you. Right. Because I'm an
Shame on
adult
you.
and I can make my own decisions.
Yeah.
Right. But if I say to me, like, Carl, I see you're going through this situation. Are you open to me sharing some of my experience? This is what I've experienced. This is what I did that was helpful for me. Like, what are your thoughts? What might be helpful for you in this situation? And as a coach, I might not be giving that experience, right? That may not be my role to share my experience because it's not about me. But as a leader, or as a parent, or as a friend, or an acquaintance, like I can say, I can't tell you what will work for you, but if you're open to it, I can share what was helpful for me. And then I don't give it to you with any strings attached. So do it or don't do it. I don't really care.
Yeah.
But this was my experience and this is what I learned from it. And that can be helpful to some people who maybe don't know where to even start. But I wouldn't go to some complete stranger and be like, you know what? Here's a 4-point plan for what you need to do to get your life together. It could be, by the way, the most impactful thing for them, but it's also not my position. It's not my place, and it's probably not helpful.
Yeah.
So worry about yourself.
Yeah.
Worry about
No,
yourself.
honestly, no, I've practiced, how I answer those questions when people have challenges or I notice a performance dip. Okay, so this is where you were, this is where you are, or you started, or this is where you are right now. This is the required goal. Talk to me about your experiencing. What are you experiencing? What's easy, what's hard, right?
Right.
And just hopefully they'll, when they hear that I'm actually interested in hearing what they're experiencing rather than me telling them you need to figure it out. And this is how I did it, and I got it done in 6 months. I don't understand why it's taking you so long,
Right.
right? Sure, maybe inside we're like, that's weird. I got it so quickly. Why aren't they getting it? But that has nothing to do with reality. That has everything to do with our perception of the situation. Reality comes to for when we actually hear what they're experiencing, what is real for them, right? Which may be completely different than what's real to us because we have our real, they have their real, and the truth is somewhere in between, right? And it's
Yeah.
very often reached. It's very often not reached, right? So,
Mhm.
what are you experiencing? What are some of the challenges you have? And it might be for you, oh, that's easy, just do this, but then that's a judgment. Oh, that's easy. No, it's not. They just told you it's hard,
Right.
right? So when we're talking to people about that, even if it's something that we can help them with in a snap, okay, so you're saying that's challenging. So what part of it is challenging? Okay, and so how are you going about it? All right, so we can talk to people and have them fully explain it. And very often they'll say, actually, I should have done this, or maybe I could do this before we even get to, well, this is what worked for me, right?
Mhm.
And if they come to it on their own, that's great. I was telling them yesterday, and I tell people all the time, with coaches, the last thing you want to do is give advice. All right. That's the very
Right.
last thing. Here's what I have for you at the end. So how are you feeling? Okay, well, if you need some more resources, you can do this, you can do that without telling, well, this is what I would do if I were you. Because like I said, that personalization, if we take it personal, they're going to take it personal as if the way I'm doing it is right and the way you're doing it is wrong, which how often is that not even the case? It's just different, right? And so it's a hard thing for us to change our perceptions and a hard thing for us to shift that idea from the way that I do things, the way I was taught to do things is correct, right? And so the way you're doing things and the way you were taught to do things are wrong. And if you tell somebody that how they grew up, with somebody who loved them and cared about them and gave them a life lesson and maybe, it's not working out for them, is wrong, people are going to take that personal, right? And
Mhm.
so, just getting to those questions. So, how is it different? How is it different than what you were raised with, right? What approaches have you used? So it's really a conversation about them, right? And then if people are still stuck, or if they ask you specifically, so I don't know, what did you do? Well, okay, well, you want to know what I did, right? Then here's what I did. But also, I know
Mhm.
that doesn't work for everybody. I have a different way of solving math problems, right? I have a weird way of getting them, even though I solve them, and so it's and most people don't understand it. And I've been told, that I, you need to show your work and blah 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 and all this. And I'm like, well, but it's hard for me to show my work because I can't necessarily tell you how I got there. I just know that I got there and it's correct, right? So, but does that make me wrong? Or does it make me different than the customary way of doing things, right?
Mhm.
Because there is a big difference.